In this video, we're going to talk about all the words that we have come across so far that are going to begin with Q. It can be somewhat confusing. And also, we're going to talk about, for the first time, interrogatives. That is, interrogative adjectives and interrogative pronouns, which are very similar to, of course, the relatives. So, going back to the relatives, qui, qui, quod, quis, 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 qui, 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 quim, quam, quo, 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 and so forth and so on. Remember that these are the words that are going to translate as a relative, introducing a relative clause, who verbs, which verbs, whose whatever, or which is whatever, to whom, to, and so forth and so on. But in Latin 1, in very first chapter, you have two words that are a part of the chapter introduction. One is the word qui, which is who, and the other is the word quis, which is who. The difference is that this who is the relative who. In other words, it will have an introduction of a relative clause, and it is a subordinate clause that cannot stand on its own. Versus these over here are the relative pronouns, or not relative pronouns, the interrogative pronouns. And by the way, there are going to be 3 beverages that I mentioned at random parts during this video, that if you simply write down those beverages in a Canvas quiz, you're going to receive a free 100. Now, here you can see the interrogative pronouns, and they are rather similar to the relatives. The only difference is going to be then the nominative. Instead of qui, qui, quod, it'll be quis, quis, quid. And please note that in this line, this column, masculine and feminines are identical. And it would translate as who does something, question mark, versus what does something, question mark. Then in the accusative, it'll be different in that instead of quim, quam, quod, it is quim, quim, quid. You would expect the quid, obviously, to be the same as the nominative, but for both masculine and feminine, it is going to be, obviously, the same word quim. So here, the question would be, whom does the subject verb? Or what does the subject verb? Now, please note that for the interrogative plural pronouns, they are the exact same. Now, how are you going to know the difference between whether it's a relative or an interrogative? Interrogative asks questions. So, let's take a look at a study guide that I have made for examples of each. So here you can see, and I'll be putting this on Canvas, obviously, interrogative pronouns are similar, very much so, to relatives. They only differ in the 2 places that I said. Now, you can also have interrogative adjectives. And interrogative adjectives are exactly, both in the singular and the plural, identical to relatives. How do you know whether it's an interrogative pronoun or an interrogative adjective? By the fact if it's modifying something or not. So let's look at the examples that I give. So, here I have nominative, nominative. One is an interrogative pronoun, the other interrogative adjective. And sometimes I put one before the other, and let's just go through them. So, quis puellam amant. Quis is my interrogative. Is it an adjective or is it a pronoun? Well, this one's easy. And the reason being, remember that the pronouns are going to be quis, quis, quid. Whereas if it were an adjective, it'd be the same as the relatives, qui, qui, quod. So here, quis puellam amant. Who loves the girl? Who, in this sentence, is a pronoun. It is standing on its own. Compare that to over here. Qui puer, puellam amant. Because the word qui, which comes from that chart, qui, qui, quod, is modifying the puer, has the same case number and gender, it is the interrogative adjective, and thus asks which boy or what boy loves the girl. So the difference, who loves the girl versus which boy or what boy loves the girl. Look at it in the genitive. Cuius vicini canis per horto meo cucurrit. So the dog did run through my garden. Here, it is the interrogative adjective saying which neighbor's apostrophe s dog. The dog of which neighbor? The dog of what neighbor? Ran through my garden. So it's an adjective modifying vicini in the genitive. Compare that to the pronoun And it says, the dog of whom, or whose dog, ran through my garden. So again, you'll know the difference. One, in the form, if it were a nominative, quis, quis, quid for pronouns, qui, qui, quod, nominative for interrogative adjectives. Here, the form is exactly the same. So how do you know that this one is the adjective and that one is the pronoun? Because obviously that's modifying and that is not. Whose dog? The dog of whom ran through my garden. Your first beverage is tea. T-E-A. Look at the third one. Cui pecuniam dabimus. And here you have cui as well. To whom will we give the money? Over here, cui is modifying mercatory, and not to whom, but to which merchant will we give the money. And thus, even though cui and cui are the identical, I know that this is the interrogative adjective modifying mercatory, whereas that's the interrogative pronoun. Look at it in the accusative. Quem puella amat. Whom does the girl love? Pronoun. Quem over here is modifying puerum. Which boy? What boy does the girl love? In the ablative. Quo. Here, quo, and here, quo. The difference is that that quo is modifying bacalo. With what stick had Dawes beaten Geta? With what had Dawes beaten Geta? And then finally, let's consider the quid of the neuter, nominative or accusative. Quid, senatores in curia dixere. What? Quis means who, quid means what. What did the senators say? Remember the alternate ending for dico, dicere, dixi, perfect stem, dix, ere is the same as erunt. What did the senators say in the curia versus quod concilium? If it is the pronoun, quid, the adjective, qui, qui, quod, same as the relatives. What plan did the senators say in the curia? Now, if we look at a couple of the examples that we have in the passages, in chapter 29, down near the bottom that we're going to be reading, you can see here the question, quid occidit? What happened? Now, you don't have to have an interrogative, pronoun, or adjective to ask a question. Remember, by putting a nay on the end of a verb, or the end of a word, it can tell you the sentence is a question. Did you see? But if you do have the pronoun what, or if it's quis, who. You can see another example in chapter 30, in which, if we were to look here again, you see, quid, what are we able to do? That quid is the quid in my chart. Uh-oh. There we are. Not that one. Yikes. There it is. Right here. Because what does something, what did something else do? What verbs, what the subject verbs as a direct object. And we can see that with here. What thing are we able to do? You can see it in chapter 31. Here, the interrogative adjective. Quem porcum. Which pig do you want to sell to me? And so in that way, obviously, you have the adjective modifying it. Your second beverage is Sprite. S-P-R-I-T. Now, let us consider some other Q words. In that, if you take the qui, qui, quod and put a dom on the end of it, it is then going to now mean a certain a certain subject verbs, a certain subject verbs, a certain subject verbs of a certain thing, of a certain thing, of a certain thing, for or to a certain thing. You don't look at the dom part to figure out what it's modifying, because these are demonstrative, indefinite adjectives. Instead, you look at the qui part to know that it's modifying something nominative. You look at the cuius part to know that it's modifying something genitive. You look at the cui part. You ignore the dom part. Very often students see the dom part and think that it's modifying something accusative. No. You look at the qui, qui, quo part. The quo, the qui, the quorum, and so forth and so on. Likewise, if you would take is, ea, id, which of course is the personal pronouns, and put dem on the end of those, it's going to mean the same. The same masculine subject verbs, the same feminine subject verbs, the same neuter subject verbs, of the same masculine thing, of the same feminine thing, of the same neuter thing, to the same masculine thing, to the same, to the, and so forth and so on. They all mean it. And again, likewise, you don't look at the dem part, you look at the is, ea, id part. You don't look at the dem part, you look at the is, ea, id part. You don't look at the dem part, you look at the is, ea, id part to see what it's modifying, because these are demonstrative adjectives, the indefinites, and more demonstrative adjectives that will be modifying. Now, you also have encountered previously quod when it can mean because, quam when it can show an exclamation. So there are lots of these Q words that you have to be familiar with. So let's go through them now. The charioteers not always will win. I know that's will win because it's winco, wincade. And a long E in a third conjugated verb is future. So the charioteers will not always win. Our Q word here is quorum, which is a relative introducing a relative clause. Arigai is its antecedent. Thus, arigai forces quorum to be plural, because it is plural. Forces quorum to be masculine, because even though it's first declension, it is masculine. But different cases, because in the different clauses, they have different functions. The horses of whom are very fast. Whose horses are very fast. The second one, that's my Q word. It actually begins with a C. It's modifying, mercatori, asking a question. So this is your interrogative adjective. To dative case, which merchant will Aurelia give the money? So that is my interrogative adjective. Mercatori again, still in the dative case. So, main clause, subordinate clause, that is a relative clause. Aurelia will give the money to the merchant who sells dormice. That qui is masculine because mercatori is masculine, but when we look at that qui, it could be nominative, singular, or it could be nominative, plural. You see it? Let's erase that quickly. That qui or that qui. But because it's referring to the mercatori, we know that it's that one. Because if that's singular, that has to be singular. Who sells. And also we know that it's singular because subject-verb agreement. Subject and verb singular. Quam ingains escercus. It has an exclamation, so this is the quam exclamatory. How huge the circus is. Quis, interrogative pronoun. Whoever has seen, perfect tense, tantum edificium, so big a building, so great a building, tantus aum. He amici, these friends, well, I like to make my main clauses in blue, will be, and that's a word that means on holiday, quibuscum. That is a relative referring back to the amici, and the cum attached to it, with whom, that's ablative plural, because amici is plural. That is masculine because amici is masculine. Quibus is all three genders. Quibus, quibus, quibus. with whom we will go to the amphitheater tomorrow. The friends with whom. Ankylai quaidon. Here you can see the qui qui quod. The dom, but you don't look at the dom. Instead, you look at the quai to tell that it's modifying the ankylai. But with that dom there, it's certain slave ladies were caring for the hair of Aurelia. We're taking care of Aurelia's hair. Aurelia was angry. Quod could be from qui qui quod, neuter singular nominative, or neuter accusative singular, but only if it has a neuter singular antecedent, not neuter singular. So this is the quod causal. It's the word because when we first learned quod. Aurelia was angry because the slave ladies were taking care of her hair negligently. Citizens, in the main clause, QAs, auriga spectabat. The citizens were watching the charioteers. Plural because that is plural. Masculine because that is masculine. Genitive in its own clause because it is showing possession of the shouts. The shouts of whom or whose shouts we all heard. We did hear. That's your accusative direct object working with the genitive showing possession. Quam exclamatory. How fat is the man who, this would be the relative clause, introduced by the relative pronoun. That is the main clause. How fat is that man? Exclamation point. The man singular, who singular. The man masculine, who masculine, reads a book in the litter. And then finally the last one, hanc urbim. I'm not going to start with that because that's accusative. Go to my verb. And here, main clause, we love very much this city. This city, in which we live. That is, taking urbim as its antecedent. Urbim is singular, so therefore that is singular. Urbim is feminine, so therefore that is feminine. But this is ablative because it is object of the preposition in, showing us the location, ablative of place where. Urbim, its antecedent, does not have the same case. Your last beverage is coffee, C-O-F-F-E-E. And urbim is the direct object of its clause. So not the same case, but the same gender, feminine, feminine, and the same number, singular, singular. Hopefully this can help you out a little bit understanding all your Q words, and especially the new interrogatives. Thanks.